The Star Wars galaxy is impossibly expansive. In the decade since A New Hope first hit theaters, Star Wars has been a lot of different things to a lot of different people, occupying a unique space between science fiction and fantasy that many people refer to as science fantasy. Nothing is more symbolic of Star Wars' unique aesthetic or its insane popularity than lightsabers and the characters that wield them. These characters are in many ways the core element that makes Star Wars stand out, but they're just one element of the Star Wars universe, and I think recent projects have begun to show that sometimes, if not often, Star Wars is better off without the Jedi. This is not because I dislike Jedi, either as a concept or as individual characters. Many of my favorite characters are Force users, and some of my favorite storylines in recent Star Wars have featured some pretty out-there concepts, from space whales and Force gods to secretive cults and ancient Sith. A well-placed cameo or a familiar face in a major role can do wonders to elevate a project if done properly, but recent Star Wars projects have felt just a little too familiar lately, coming out and playing all the hits night after night to smaller and smaller rounds of applause. It's not a coincidence that the projects that often get the best reception are the ones that diverge from the beaten path a bit, putting everyone's favorite action figures back on the shelf just for a little bit in order to tell all new stories with all new characters, many of which have no special plot armor or hidden powers. Shows like Andor, Mandalorian Season 1, or even Skeleton Crew don't shy away from the fact that they take place in a shared universe, but they also don't call undue attention to that fact. Good Star Wars is often inspired by other Star Wars projects, but great Star Wars projects are inspired by many of the same things that inspired the original movies, preserving the Wild West, samurai, hero's journey influences that gave the Star Wars galaxy such a unique yet familiar feeling in the first place. Staying faithful to these original influences affords the galaxy far, far away something it quite desperately needs: a sense of contrast and scale. When everyone is special, nobody really feels special, and when every storyline features the same handful of superpowered characters showing up over and over again, the walls begin to close in a bit on the Star Wars universe until it feels less like a galaxy and more like an exceptionally crowded neighborhood. The Jedi are little more than a myth to most people in the Star Wars universe, and keeping them off camera for just a little bit doesn't take away from their influence as much as it reinforces that legendary status. To illustrate my point, let's talk about The Mandalorian. Like many Mandoverse shows, later seasons of The Mandalorian did fall for the cameo trap, piling in increasingly unlikely encounters for its titular character until the original lower-stakes bounty hunting plot was lost to the sands of time. But one cameo stands out as being quite well done. You probably know the one I'm talking about. Luke's appearance in The Mandalorian works for a variety of reasons. Grogu's appearance early in the show is a mystery not just to the audience, but to the Mandalorian himself, who knows virtually nothing about the Force. As the show's conflict escalates, the Mandalorian is shown to be an extremely competent character, capable of handling most situations you could throw at the average bounty hunter with relative ease. And that makes it all the more impressive when Moff Gideon finally puts his cards on the table, thwarting the Mandalorian's rescue attempt and reminding the audience that the Mandalorian is just a moderately sized fish in a pretty big pond. And then suddenly there's a shark in the water and it's all over. Luke doesn't break a sweat, solving 2 full seasons of conflict in just a couple of minutes, invoking so much fear in Moff Gideon that he attempts to leave the premises, well, by any means necessary. Like I said, this scene works quite well for a couple of reasons. The main cast's lack of familiarity with Luke helps reinforce the idea that seeing a real Jedi is more like a cryptid sighting than it is just another Tuesday. And for the audience, Luke is a similarly rare figure. The original trilogy cast of characters is used shockingly sparingly as a whole, but no character appears as infrequently relative to their importance to the franchise as Luke, which made his sudden appearance feel genuinely special. But as well as this scene worked, it also does illustrate some of the problems with introducing Jedi to a storyline. Luke's appearance completely overshadowed much of the rest of the show, trivializing this supposedly powerful villain in just a few moments, and the following season felt somewhat cheap as a result. Not because it was bad, but because Luke is just an impossible act to follow. But while Luke Skywalker has at least been afforded the luxury of only appearing sporadically in recent years, many characters have begun to wear out their welcome a bit. I personally liked the Ahsoka show, but there's just no denying that it suffered a bit from the overuse of Ahsoka herself in previous projects. After Clone Wars, Rebels, Tales of the Jedi, Mandalorian, and Book of Boba Fett, the novelty of seeing Ahsoka is definitely starting to fade, even in live action, and the muted response to what previously would have been a monumentally popular show does reflect that. Andor strikes an interesting contrast, serving as a glimpse into the lives of Star Wars characters for whom no knight in shining armor will ever appear. It's a comparatively bleak and serious show, without any particularly special headline characters, but it has massively outperformed anyone's wildest expectations, becoming the gold standard of Disney Star Wars content and earning the biggest financial investment to ever be put into a Disney Star Wars show. The demand is there for more grounded sci-fi stories within the Star Wars universe, and we can only hope Disney takes the right lessons from the show's success. Star Wars is at its best when it escapes the cycle of self-reverence and branches out, not just for narrative reasons, but because it helps the franchise branch out to new fans and new generations of fans. It's an important lesson that another star-themed franchise once faced when one character began to overshadow the rest of the franchise. Spock's popularity was initially a huge boost to Star Trek's success, but as he appeared more and more, the franchise became reliant on him to drive any sort of interest as the franchise faded in popularity. Marvel is also struggling to move on from its lead characters, with many of their post-Endgame projects failing to gain any real traction, which has left them crawling back to Robert Downey Jr. only a few short years after insisting the brand was moving on for good. Of course, there's nothing inherently wrong with franchises leaning on their most popular characters. They're popular for a reason. But when the people whining about bricks and screws and any character not named Anakin begin to outnumber the amount of fans who are genuinely passionate about new stories being told, that puts a shelf life on the franchise. And considering how long Star Wars has managed to evolve and expand, it would be a pity to throw in the towel now. Star Wars has been revived for new generations of fans many times, not just on screen, but in games and on the pages of books written primarily by more traditional science fiction authors, who wrote stories about Jedi, yes, but also X-Wing pilots, smugglers, bounty hunters, and ordinary citizens. It will always be fun to watch space wizards clash, but sometimes it's also important not to miss the forest for the trees.